Pedro, I'm so glad that you have become the second recipient of the SAGE-CASBS Award, which honors social scientists, behavioral scientists, people who put their knowledge, their work, their findings at the disposal of policymakers. Can you tell me how you have attempted to interact with policymakers and what you feel enables you to be most effective in that part of your work?
Well, I have, first of all, I'm such an honor to be the recipient of this award, and I really appreciate your generosity and bestowing on me. In my own work, I've tried to engage policymakers at multiple levels, with the federal, the state, and the local, on issues not simply related to education, but as I talked about earlier today, issues around poverty and inequality, because I believe that those are some of the primary issues affecting schools today in America. What I found to be increasingly important is to also speak to the broader public, to write editorials, to engage media, because I think if you treat the policymakers as the only audience for your work, you often end up frustrated. And I have found that if I can take an idea and find a way to capture it into an op-ed and get it placed in a place like the New York Times or the Wall Street Journal, that has much more currency and attracts more attention from policymakers than a white paper that you send off and get published on a university website. So I'm still exploring how to do it, but I'm increasingly convinced that media is the way, because I think it's when we educate the public about these important social issues that we're more likely to capture the attention of policymakers.
Well, I tend to agree with you. It's one of the reasons that I actually started a nonprofit, the second one that I started, and it's called the Miller McCune Center for Research, Media, and Public Policy. We publish the magazine Pacific Standard, and we have 75,000 print readers and 1 million unique visitors per month. So anytime you'd like to reach those million folks a month,
I'll follow up.
Come on by.
I will.
You've devoted your career to closing the education gap and achieving what I love to call educational justice, because it's one of the 4 justices that I'm most keenly intrigued by. How has your work as a social scientist helped you in this endeavor?
What I've tried to get people to see through my work in the policy world is that the disparities in education are really a reflection of broader disparities in our society, and that we can't address them through education alone, that we've got to do more to make sure that families have adequate income, adequate housing, health, etc. We have, as a nation, ignored that, even though what the record shows is we made the greatest progress as a country in reducing academic disparities during the war on poverty and its aftermath. And that's largely because we were doing more outside of schools to support families. And my hope is that we will see again in the future that if we really want education to have the impact it can have and must have on our future, because we must invest in our people through education, then we've got to do more to support families that are struggling right now just to get by. And so that really is where my work as a social scientist has been so helpful, is to show those connections between educational opportunity and quality of life in communities.
Well, I couldn't agree with you more. The 4 justices that I mentioned earlier actually are economic justice, educational justice, environmental justice, and social justice. And I think in order to have a better society, you need all of those. I think we agree very much on this, and I wonder if you have in your mind a better game plan for reaching the policymakers, not just in government, but also in business, and in general, the media, I would say, because they often have influence on what gets the spotlight.
Yeah. So I've been grappling with that and trying to figure out the best way to influence the national conversation about education. And I agree with you completely. I think that when we engage the media and the private sector, we actually can have more influence on the policymakers that way. So what I've found is that it's important to both help explain what the problem is, because why we have the problem in education. People are aware of the fact that we have large numbers of kids not graduating, not going to college, that we're falling behind other countries with respect to our educational progress. But it's also important to say, and this is what we could do differently. It is that it's by balancing the diagnosis of the problem with a very clear and compelling case of how it could be done differently that I think captures the imagination of the broad public, but also of decision makers. And that's what I aim to do through my work, is to try to change the conversation, but also to reinvigorate a sense of hope and possibility. Because it's when we no longer think that we can do this, then we're really doomed.
Well, that's true. In your speech today, you identified, I think, 5 points that you thought really could make a difference, particularly with influencing policy making as it happens in our country in this 21st century. Could you perhaps just run through them again?
Sure. It's the 5 essential ingredients for school improvement. And when you think about them, they don't strike you as at all unusual. They almost sound like common sense. So the first is a coherent instructional guidance system. And what that means basically is teachers aren't left to figure out on their own how to teach their children. They get the support they need, and they work together to deliver high-quality instruction. Secondly, that there's ongoing development of the professional capacity of the educators, because you don't graduate from school a master teacher, and you often don't have the skills you need to meet the learning needs of the children. And so there has to be ongoing attention to those needs and to developing the skills of the educators. Third, the learning climate. And it's so important that we make sure that we address the conditions in schools. Safety is absolutely essential for good learning, but so is respect, so is courtesy, so is a positive learning climate so that children feel welcomed and want to be in school and the teachers feel supported. Fourth is the importance of parent and community engagement. And the reason why that's so essential is because we know that over 50% of student achievement is influenced by what parents do at home. And if we could get our parents to play a more active role with their children at home, it would result in much, much higher gains for children in school. But we also need communities to support their schools so that the non-academic needs of children, the health needs and mentorship, are also being reinforced by the community. And then fifth is leadership. The importance of leadership that can drive the change, that can support a school or a school system, to stay the course and to look at evidence and learn from mistakes. Leadership is essential. So those 5 ingredients, I think they strike you as being basic, that we should be able to do this, but sadly they're not reflected in what we're doing in the name of policy. We're not looking at those 5 ingredients and asking, okay, how do we make sure we shore them up when they're not in place? And so that's the reason why I tried to present them today, is so that because there's a lot we know about what it takes to succeed that we ignore.
Yeah. And it doesn't pay to ignore what we already know.
That's right, that's right.
Thank you so much, Pedro.
Thank you for having me, and it's been a pleasure talking to you.
I feel the same way.